Hello and welcome to Open Door with Secretary of the Air Force, Deborah Lee James. I'm your host, Tech Sergeant Holly Roberts-Davis. Thanks for joining us. Though it seems like it wasn't too long ago, it's been a year now since Secretary James last joined us for her live Open Door, where she discussed her first year as Secretary of the Air Force. As you can imagine, she's been pretty busy since then, so she's here to discuss the progress we've made over the past year, as well as give us a glimpse into the way ahead. So, Secretary James, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you, Holly. Thank you.
Yep. All right. Well, since we're going to go ahead and get started here, during the show, the Secretary will be taking questions live from satellite and from Skype, and if we've got time, even from members here in our audience. But we've also got Staff Sergeant Tracy Keller standing by in our social media room, ready to share any questions you all have for the Secretary on Facebook and Twitter. So let's go to Sergeant Keller now to explain what you need to do to have your questions be seen.
Thank you very much, Sergeant Roberts-Davis. That's right. I'm here in our social media room with the Secretary's team. We're right now gathering your questions from social media, from Facebook, from Twitter, all by using the hashtag SECAF chat. You can submit your questions throughout the show, and just be sure to use that hashtag, and we will try to get those toward the Secretary.
All right, thank you, Sergeant Keller. We'll be checking back with Sergeant Keller throughout the show. So like I said, make sure, like she said actually, make sure you use that hashtag so we can get your questions to the Secretary. Now that we've got an idea of what to expect, let's go ahead and really get things started. Secretary James, again, you were here at the same time last year, and you kind of gave us a recap of, what you had done in your first year as Secretary of the Air Force and what you plan to do in your second year. So how'd that second year go for you, and what can we expect in the future?
Well, it certainly has been an exciting year, too, for me as Secretary of the Air Force. It remains the highest honor of my professional life, hands down. It's been a busy year. It's been a busy year for our Air Force, where we have taken the fight to these barbaric people who call themselves ISIL or Daesh in the Middle East. So that's been big on our plate. It's been a big budget year where we've had ongoing debates with the Congress trying to get the resources that we need and the policy perspectives that we need. We're coming ready to close out that year, and I think we're going to be in pretty good shape. So it's been an exciting year for me since day one, and my priorities until the day I leave office will be the same. And number one, first and foremost, taking care of people. And among all of our people priorities, we have got to stop this downsizing that we have been going through for the better part of 20 or 25 years. Enough is enough, and instead we need to modestly upsize active, National Guard, and Reserve. All three components need to upsize modestly. Number two, we need to effectively balance our investments and our priorities between readiness today and modernizing for tomorrow, because our aircraft and other equipment are aging. We have got to become a newer, more up-to-date Air Force over time, and that's modernization. And number three, precisely because we do have very tough budgetary times and will have such times for the foreseeable future, we have to make every dollar count. We have to be efficient. We have to continue to address our headquarters spending, look for efficiencies in every way, shape, and form. So those are my priorities today, and they will remain so in the coming year.
All right, well, that seems like you've got a lot on your plate coming up, but I'm going to say from experience, I think you can handle it. All right, well, as I mentioned, we're going to be taking questions live from airmen around the world throughout the show from satellite and Skype, in addition to the social media questions that Sergeant Keller will bring us later on. Right now, we actually have our first Skype question queued up, so let's see what they have for us.
Right.
If you could please introduce yourself to the SECAF and go ahead with your question.
Hello, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Mike Jones, the Deputy Staff Judge Advocate stationed at Hanscom Air Force Base. Secretary James, my question is, with things heating up in Iraq and Syria, what role will the Air Force fill in the fight against ISIL?
Well, Mike, let me tell you, and let me tell the rest of our Air Force, our United States Air Force, without question, is leading this fight against these barbaric people who call themselves Daesh or ISIL in the Middle East, and we really have since day one. Now, with that said, it's a joint fight and it's a coalition fight. There are more than 60 countries that have joined with the United States, but the United States Air Force, without question, has carried the lion's share of the activity. So we have been striking in earnest all sorts of targets, from the high-value human targets to command and control centers, to training sites, you name it, we've been striking it. We've been providing very, very important ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, precisely so that we know what to strike and what not to strike. We take enormous care to hit only those targets we wish to hit and to avoid unnecessary loss of innocent life. Mobility forces have been crucial for the transport of materiel and people, for airdrops, and for retanking the fighter and other strike aircraft and other assets in the area. So that too has been important. And of course, our cyber and our space capabilities, they enable everything we do nowadays. And then there are support people who are also contributing to this overall effort. And let me tell you, we are making progress. We are getting our job done, and now what we need is those indigenous ground forces to further step up and get their piece of the job done. And of course, we do need lasting political and diplomatic solutions so that whatever the peace becomes, it will be a lasting peace and take us into the future. So our United States Air Force is and will remain at the forefront, and we will be very, very busy precisely because of this.
All right. Well, did that answer your question?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great, wonderful. All right, well, as I mentioned, we're going to be getting a lot of questions from Skype and satellite and just various places from airmen around the world. But if anybody has a question for the Secretary right now, maybe they can come up, and if not, then we'll just keep moving on. Does anybody have a question? Okay, all right, sorry. All right, go ahead and please introduce yourself.
Morning, ma'am. I'm Airman First Class Hall at Joint Base Andrews Passenger Terminal. My question for you is going to be that at the Air and Space Conference earlier in September, you had mentioned that sequestration could have caused more budget cuts and personnel cuts, and luckily we didn't have that. However, you also mentioned that we want to move towards a more modern and leaner Air Force. With that, with mission effectiveness as the primary goal, will more squadrons such as my own have to continue working with undermanning and lacking of resources?
Well, first I want to say that we have at long last some good budget news that is emanating now from Washington. And when I say good budget news, what I'm referring to is the fact that we now have a bipartisan budget agreement on the table where for the remainder of FY16 and into FY17 as well, we have actual defense dollar targets that we can now plan to and execute to. And for FY16, we pretty much, with a little bit of an exception, got what we asked for when you add up our base budget and our overseas contingency operations account. We pretty much got the amount of resources we asked for. That's for FY16. For 17, we're getting overall in defense about $15 billion less than what we asked for. So that's going to be more challenging, but believe me, just having that stability and knowing how to plan for it and then being able to execute appropriately is just a tremendous step forward. So that's a piece of good news. Now, as far as the undermanning that you asked about, let me say I have seen undermanning everywhere I have traveled in our United States Air Force. And indeed, it was seeing some of this in the field for myself, which caused me to come to the realization that we have got to stop this downsizing, and indeed, rather, we need to upsize just modestly. And so, as I mentioned, that is precisely what we're going to do. So I cannot tell you that these things will be solved overnight, but I can tell you that we're going to be working on it. And some of the highest priorities, in my opinion, are we have problems, and I'll say holes, in our maintenance arena, so we need to upsize in our maintenance area. We need to address some important areas in the nuclear forces. The world of our remotely piloted aircraft will be needing additional personnel, and I continue to believe that we need to upsize somewhat in our cyber capacity. So those are some of the highlights. That's not an exhaustive list, but some of the highlights. And I want to say again, everything we do is total force. So this will be upsizing modestly in the active duty, the National Guard, and the Reserve.
Thank you, ma'am.
All right, did that answer your question?
Yes, indeed.
All right, great. It looks like we do have time for one more studio question, so if there is anybody, we can take them right now. Otherwise, we'll move on. Does anybody have a question for the Secretary? Not at this time. Okay, all right, well, we will just continue on. I think it's going amazing. We have heard a lot of great stuff so far. We even got time for a studio question. But right now, let's go back and see if Sergeant Keller has anything for us in the social media room.
All right, thank you, Sergeant Roberts Davis. I definitely do have something for you. We received a question via email from Senior Airman Erica Bernier Cruz. She's out of Al Udeid Air Base, and she asks, due to budget concerns, the Air Force had a personnel cut of $18,000 in the past 2 years. Budget is still a constant concern. How can we put our minds at ease to the idea that sequestration and budget cuts will not again threaten our jobs?
Well, I wish I could say never. I wish I could say I guarantee these things with 100% degree certainty, and I can't. Because what I can do is what I can do, but of course there is the greater picture of our Congress. But what I can do is I can reiterate that we do have good news. We do have a bipartisan budget agreement, which gives us our numbers for the next 2 years. Now, with all that said, I should point out that we're currently operating under a continuing resolution, which will run out within a few days. Specifically, it runs out on December 11th. Congress appears to be on track to be able to then adopt this bipartisan budget agreement and give us a full-up appropriation for the remainder of FY16. They may not get it done right by December 11th. We may end up with another short-term continuing resolution of a couple of weeks, and if that's the case, we can get by on that. What we have to continue to carry the message forward, however, is that it is totally unacceptable to not fulfill that bipartisan budget agreement and instead to kick the can and have a long-term continuing resolution. This would be really, really bad. I'm bringing all of this out because it is still within the realm of the possible, though our best projection right now is that this will not come to pass and that we will get, certainly before the holidays, a full-up appropriation to carry us through the remainder of the fiscal year. With about the amount of money that we need. So once again, a good piece of news. I'll just give you this promise. For as long as I'm Secretary of the Air Force, and I know I speak for General Welsh, for as long as he is the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, we are going to put this people issue at the very top of our agenda, and we will continue to advocate and push and push and push, because I think this is the number one thing. We have got to stop the downsizing.
Okay, yes, ma'am. I think that, when we're talking about budgets, it all comes down to, can we get the mission done? And obviously, it's our airmen who are getting that mission done. And with an uncertain amount of money, it can be a little bit difficult, but they're still out there kind of kicking butt, I guess. So if you don't mind, I would like to take a moment and actually look at a video of, it's a very short clip of some of the work that the airmen are out there doing.
Great.
Take a look. The Defense Support Program, or DSP, has been in use for over 40 years, and the Air Force continues to squeeze more and more information from satellites that have been in orbit for longer than some of the young space operators controlling them have been alive.
These spacecraft have a design life of 5 years, but now some are old enough to drink. They're, it's 23 plus years old. And these have been providing, no kidding, data and been doing active work for the United States Air Force for decades.
We have the DSP satellite here, but if you looked at our follow-on Block 10, our SBIRS GEO satellite, it looks nothing like this. The Block 10 guidance is so different and so new that we're sort of venturing into an area that really is new to the United States military and the DoD as a whole.
The old system was very basic, and our new systems will be much more capable.
They can see a lot more, they can do a lot more.
With the onset of our new capabilities, we are able to see dimmer objects, so it doesn't require the heat that is normally associated with the tail end of a missile. We are in the midst of a once-in-a-generation time frame within this mission set. Moving forward, OPIR, Overhead Persistent Infrared, will become more and more common, and I'm convinced that across the Air Force, people will use that as much as they use the term GPS.
All right, ma'am. Now that video, I recently actually went TDY to be a part of that story, and we saw that the airmen out there are, responsible for things that people may not realize that they're responsible for. We all know that we have jets and airplanes, but we, don't always realize that we have satellites and GPS and missile warning. So when we went out there, it was really great to do that story and see The equipment that they're using, some of it is pretty old and it wasn't supposed to last very long. And they're out there working and keeping it going. But of course they have a newer system to make sure that if that one does fail, that we're still out there and prepared. And I think that shows really that the Air Force is thinking about the future and, as you mentioned, modernization. It's one of your priorities. But this, of course, isn't about satellites in space as well. It's back to those aircraft, those jets that are out there, and all of the equipment in the Air Force and modernizing the force as a whole. So what would you say is your plan for making sure that we're ready right now? We're ready today, but also that we make sure that we're taking care of the future. And how far out are we thinking when we look at the future?
Well, from the standpoint of our budget, we always work on a 1-year budget and a 5-year plan to accompany that. But in terms of our thinking, we think way beyond that. And indeed, we actually try to come up with a 20-year strategic plan, if you will, mapping out a rough order of magnitude of resources. So we try to divide our time between thinking about the here and now, but thinking about the far future, because we have obligations to do that thinking about both. In terms of the readiness of today and the modernization for tomorrow, I think we need to do several things. First of all of us in senior leadership positions, really leaders across the Air Force, we need to continue to tell the story. We need to tell the story so that we get the resources that we need to get the job done. And the number one part of the story that troubles me on readiness is about half of our combat air forces today are not sufficiently ready for a high-end fight, should we get into a high-end fight. That means the type of fight where the enemy can shoot you down or interfere with you in some major way through cyber or through space or in the air. Half of our combat air forces are not sufficiently ready for that kind of a fight. We've got to do better. And so that is why I'm committed. Chief is also very, very committed to making sure that we fully fund all of the flying hours that we can reasonably execute. As an example, why we need to up our game when it comes to range infrastructure so that we can practice against these simulated threats and get readier for such a high-end fight. Readiness, of course, is a function of how we invest our money, but it's also a function of the time of our people and how frequently we can free them up to do this sort of training. And it is the time of our people which has become even more precious because we're so busy around the world. So readiness, keep in mind, is a function of both those things. But regardless, we've got to do better, and part of that is investing. So you'll see that as our budget rolls out, we'll invest a good deal. Same story on modernization. We've got to keep our modernization accounts. We've got to keep our 3 top programs, the F-35, the new tanker, the long-range strike bomber. We've got to keep moving ahead on these. We've also got to make important investments in nuclear and space and cyber. So there's a lot on our plate. And I mentioned earlier, for FY17, we're $15 billion down across the Department of Defense vis-a-vis what we need. So we are going to have to make some tough choices. There's no such thing as a free lunch. And you heard me say, people are number one with me. That leaves readiness accounts and it leaves modernization accounts. And we are in the throes right now of trying to figure out the final adjustments of how we're going to make ends meet before our budget rolls out next year.
All right, ma'am, I think it's very important to find a balance in that. If we're not ready today, then we can't be ready tomorrow.
Right.
So it's very important that we find that balance. As you mentioned, part of the modernization, though, is the KC-46A and the long-range strike bomber contract. But you also mentioned the F-35A Lightning II, and we can't, of course, forget about that. And in case any of you didn't realize this, the 388th Fighter Wing out at Hill Air Force Base in Utah was actually the first fully operational F-16 fighter wing back in 1979, and this last October they just marked beginning of F-35 operations out there. So it's kind of interesting to see how that has happened. And I also know that you like to get out there and talk with airmen across the world to see what they're doing out there. So we actually have somebody from the 388th out at Hill. So if they're on satellite right now, so if you could introduce yourself to the secretary, please.
Hi, my name is Staff Sergeant Jeff Kelsby from the 388th Fighter Wing. I work for the Rude Rams.
Okay, and if you could just kind of let the secretary know what you do out there and how it's going with the F-35.
So out here I work on the weapons system. It's a lot of fun. We're developing as it goes through. we're excited to march towards our IOC and hit the dates that we need to do and be fully mission capable and deploy and have all the fun we need to have and put an end to ISIL and have the bad terrorists over there.
Okay. Do you
That's
have any
great.
questions for him and the mission that he's doing out there?
So Jeff, is it going well? What's your assessment of the aircraft? How's it going, and do you think we're going to be ready for IOC?
I think we're well on our way ready for IOC.
Okay.
Our flying rate's been in the 90%. We're doing phenomenally well. We should be doing well, and everything here is progressing much better than last bases previously I was at. We had some issues, but we've developed those through lessons learned through the years of having the aircraft. It's developed very well and proven itself to be very confident and capable of performing all the missions that we have set at hand for it.
Well, what I hear from airmen, as I've talked about the F-35 over my 2 years, airmen like Jeff, is that despite the various problems that you read about from time to time, and let's face it, all developmental programs have their challenges, but despite all of that, this is an aircraft which is going to be a true leap ahead for our capability, for our technology, for the United States of America. It's something that we very much need for our future, and so to push it over the finish line now, to get to IOC next year as we are projecting, and I'm not seeing any showstoppers to that, and I'm going to quote Jeff in that regard as well now, is terribly, terribly important. And of course, after the initial operating capabilities several years later will be the full operating capability. But it's an important area for our country, for our Air Force, and we're going to stick with it.
All right. Do you have anything else for the Secretary?
No, ma'am. Thank you
Okay.
for your time.
All right.
Thanks, Jeff.
All right. Thank you. Again, it's one of your favorite things to do, as you mentioned before we got started, to get out there and see the airmen, and it really gives you a firsthand glimpse into how it's really going out there. How does it, I guess, make you feel to know that the Air Force is in good hands, and what does that tell you about our readiness and capabilities?
Well, I think our super secret weapon, it's not all that super secret, but the best weapon of all is our airmen. Mm-hmm. I really do. And I, of course, travel around the world and around the country. I see our airmen at our bases. But the other thing I have the opportunity to do a fair amount is I also interact with some of our international partners around the world. So these are some of the other air forces with whom we operate. For example, I was just recently over in Iraq and was speaking about coalition matters in the fight against ISIL. And what each and every one of these partners tell me is that they want more, not less, but more interface with the United States Air Force. So they want more training, they want more exercise opportunities, they want to understand how we have our personnel systems, because by the way, our enlisted force in particular, our NCO Corps, this is the envy of the rest of the world in terms of other militaries around the world. They also want to upgrade equipment, buy new equipment, so we are very much in demand, and we are very much the partner of choice, and I think that is first and foremost because of our people.
All right, ma'am. Thank you for that. And something else that's in demand is social media. Everybody's on it. I'm not, but everybody else is. So let's go ahead and see what Sergeant Keller has for us in the social media room.
Thank you very much, Sergeant Roberts Davis. We're standing by in the social media room. I'm here with the Secretary's team, and we're fielding a number of questions from social media by folks using the hashtag SECAF chat. That's how we can see your questions, so make sure when you submit your questions, you use that hashtag. We have one Facebook question right now from Master Sergeant Jason Singletary, and he asks, as more time is required from our drill status guardsmen and reservists, beyond the 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks a year, are there plans to expand benefits or other incentives for traditional guard and reservists?
That's a good question. So let me give you a few updates in this regard. There was not too long ago a national commission on the future of the Air Force structure, looked at our National Guard, our Reserve, as well as our active duty, and came out with a number of findings. One of the findings of the commission was that we currently have 34 separate duty statuses for our National Guardsmen and reservists. So 34 different ways to bring them on active duty to do certain work under certain circumstances for different durations of time. And each one of those 34 different duty statuses carries with it different roles and benefits and responsibilities. 34. So I think we can all pretty much agree 34 different duty statuses is probably too many. Things have grown up over time, and we've never sunset some of these statuses. So under Secretary Carter's recently announced Force of the Future, which, by the way, this is going to continue to roll out additional initiatives on Force of the Future. But some of the initial rollout targeted this issue of reserve component duty statuses, said to all of us and made a challenge to all of us, let's see if we can streamline that. Let's see if we can figure out what are the most important duty statuses to go forward with and streamline the number. And I believe as part of that overall review, we'll be able to zero in on the benefits and incentives and things of this nature. And there's where there would be an opportunity to look at whether or not we've got it right or whether or not we need to make tweaks in this area. So stay tuned. I think there's going to be follow-up here under the Force of the Future initiative.
Okay. All right. Well, it looks like, we're talking about the Force of the Future, of course, and all the changes that are hopefully on the way. So we actually have a phone question for you right now that has a little bit to do with this as well. So if you could go ahead and introduce yourself to the Secretary and go ahead with your question, please.
Good morning, ma'am. My name is Master Sergeant Kabunkel. I'm a first sergeant assigned to the 445th Operations Support Squadron out of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Dayton, Ohio. Secretary James, recently President Obama signed into law the 2016 National Defense Authorization Act that will change the military retirement system for active duty members. I was wondering if a plan similar to this one is being considered for reserve members and guardsmen.
So the question, if I heard it, is will the recent changes in the military retirement system, will we do something similar or review it for the reserve system?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, first of all, I'll report to all of you that the recent changes that have been passed into law, and we have about a year of planning and implementation work to do before this new system kicks in. There are very important elements of that system which also apply to the reserve components. So believe me, as we are building our implementation plans, we're not just focused on the active duty, we're focusing on the total force. Specifically, you may recall that one of the features of the new law would be to allow, under certain circumstances, after certain years of service, when members make contributions to the TSP program, in the future there would be matching contributions coming from the government. That feature will apply across the board to our reserve components as well. Similarly, another feature of the new law would be, there are of course many people who serve some period of time in the military, but they don't go forward to do a full 20 years and get a retirement benefit. The new law says there's going to be portability so that you can take the benefit with you if you leave after 5 years or 10 years of service. That feature as well will apply to the reserve components. So as I said, the law does go across the board, and we are building our implementation plans accordingly.
Okay, great. Did that answer your question? I'm not sure if she's still there.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right, great. So before, we have a video question coming up for you, but before we get to that, I want to touch base with Sergeant Keller and see if she's got anything else going on the social media front. Sergeant Keller.
Thank you. We've got plenty going on here in the social media room. In fact, we've got a Twitter question that comes in from Erica Staggs at mstaggs2. She asks, what is the U.S. Air Force doing to ensure a successful integration of women into all service positions while keeping standards high?
Well, the first thing that we're doing, and we've actually been working on this for some time, is we have established for our 6 career fields, which are still closed, all of which are in the special operations world of the Air Force. We have been working on establishing gender-neutral, operationally relevant standards. So let me go back over those words again. Gender-neutral, of course, means these standards will apply the same to men and to women. And operationally relevant means that the standard in some way directly relates to either the physical or the mental requirements of the actual job. So we now have those standards in place. We've tested them out. And indeed, I think as the world now knows, we did recommend to the Secretary of Defense, I certainly recommended on behalf of the Air Force, that we open those positions up and that we transition women qualified women into them. In no way, shape, or form are standards being lowered. I want to say that very, very clearly, because first and foremost, what we're about is we're about getting the job done, and that means people have to be enormously physically fit, they have to have great strength for these jobs, and they have to have tremendous mental acuity and resiliency. So the standards henceforth will be the same for men and women, and the Secretary of Defense has said we will now do it across the board, all of the services without exception. So the next steps will be, we will be drafting, and we owe these to the Secretary shortly, specific implementation plans with timelines and specific actions that we will need to meet in order to make this happen. In the meantime, we're in the middle of a 30-day waiting period with the Congress, so Congress has been informed that this is our objective and this is the way we intend to proceed. And the other point I'll make is that this will be happening over time. Because first of all, I think it is quite possible we would see women enter the training pipeline in the year 2016. But we have to keep in mind that these training programs to go into these jobs are quite rigorous. I believe from memory they're anywhere from 24 to 30 months in duration. So I think although it's possible we'll see women in the pipeline for training this coming year, it'll be several more years before we would actually see women in the unit. But we're going to be working it in earnest, and next step is to get our implementation plans together.
Okay, great. I think the important thing, again, is that we're not lowering standards. We're just, if somebody wants the opportunity to do these jobs, they will have the opportunity as long as they meet the standards.
Correct.
All right, great, ma'am. So in a little bit, we're going to take a studio question. So if anybody in our audience has one of those ready, you know, keep it in your head because we're going to get to them in just a minute. But we are approaching the halfway point. We're actually right about at the halfway point of our show. So right now, we're going to go to that video question that I told you about. So please take a look.
My question for you today is, in this day and age where we constantly hear the mantra of do more with less, how is the best way to strike a balance between taking care of our people and ensuring the mission gets done on a day-to-day basis? Thank you.
Well, I want to begin by saying I really dislike that phrase and that mantra, doing more with less. I realize that's the way it feels and that's the way it's been, but I would like to try to shift, if I can, that dialogue and make us going forward have a new mantra. And the new mantra is continually looking for different ways of doing business, to work smarter, differently, but not necessarily harder. Now, I realize that's a tall order and it's easier said than done, and I've certainly said it many times, and I too get frustrated when I don't see enough progress toward that. But I do think as leaders we need to keep the pressure on, we need to keep the focus on. Just because we've done something for 10 or 20 or 30 years the same way in our United States Air Force does not mean that in this day and age it's the best way, most efficient way, and it doesn't mean there isn't maybe a smarter, different way to approach it. So let me just talk one example, and that is the example of some of our training programs. So as airmen, of course, all of you have many different training requirements that are placed upon you so that you are fully ready for all kinds of warfare environments, all kinds of requirements that could crop up. So keeping up with all of that all the time is one approach to training. Another approach to training, I'll call it just-in-time training, where you spin up very specifically in advance of a certain deployment or a certain experience, but that you don't spin up too prematurely in advance of that experience or deployment. That's an example of an area we're moving toward, and we're already doing some of that in the Air Force, but it's an example of doing things differently. We have a website now, Airmen Powered by Innovation, and this is a central piece of our Make Every Dollar Count campaign. So this is where we're basically putting the proposition to our people. How do you see ways to work smarter, more efficiently, save money, free up time, regardless of what your job is? You're going to see some of these opportunities more than we're going to see the opportunities at headquarters. So bring it up the line. Tell us about these opportunities, and let's see if we can implement some of these ideas. And we are implementing the ideas. So I would urge you to please continue to submit those thoughts, because we continue to be hungry for them. We don't want you doing more with less. We don't want you working harder and harder because you're already working, I think, at maximum capacity. But if we can find ways to do it differently, smarter, more efficiently, let's challenge ourselves to keep looking for those opportunities.
Okay, great. I actually attended the first awarding of the Innovation Award, General Spencer's Award, and I was very impressed with how much money that those airmen were able to save. It's kind of crazy. You'd think, oh no, we're doing things all right, but they were really able to save a lot of money. And it, again, just shows that it's those airmen out there that are definitely taking care of things. So right now we're going to take a little pause in the show and we're going to take a look at another video. An intercontinental ballistic missile, in case anybody didn't know, has the power to change the course of human history and possibly even end it. That's why protecting America's nuclear arsenal is our nation's #1 defense priority. For our next clip, Air Force TV takes us behind the scenes for a rare look at the airmen who perform this vital mission. Here's a clip from our episode 4, Our Nuclear Family.
As a joint spouse couple, the Air Force still treats you as individual airmen. And so the Air Force doesn't owe us anything. We came to the Air Force, we owe them.
Apparently it's hard to drill through.
We're on call 24/7.
Is there?
You can't just walk away from it and come home. What I try to do though, especially for my kids, is make sure that when I am here, that I'm present with them. The kids aren't old enough to understand yet, but Emma gets some of it.
She thinks it's cool that we wear uniforms. She thinks it's cool, especially that we have security forces guys running around with guns, and frightens me a little bit. But you know, she gets it that we do a job that not a lot of people do.
But seeing them and being able just to have quiet time with them and focus on them, regardless of what happens at work, it always is fine when you walk through that door and see their smiling faces. They might be more happy to see me because they're hungry and not actually happy to see me, but that's my job in the family, is to make the food. So
every time we drive past the missile coming on base, my daughter will run through this whole thing about, we have that in case the bad guys do bad things. That's pretty much it in a nutshell. She understands just enough of it to know that we're in a business of trying to take care of people and make people safe.
You know, we go out, we do our jobs. As long as nothing goes bad, that's good. That's a good day. It's a good day if we don't need to be involved as ICBM operators and maintainers and security forces. I mean, it's a good day when everything goes perfect and nobody knows that you're here.
Again, we only had time for just a short clip of that episode, but you can tell just seeing that the importance of the airmen actually to the nuclear mission. You know, we have these very important missions that our airmen are out there doing every day, but as you've mentioned multiple times already, it's the people that are making it happen. I know General Welsh and Chief Cody, they've both said multiple times that we are the smallest and busiest Air Force in our entire history. So what are your plans for making sure that we remain committed to taking care of these people?
Well, my plan is continue to be the top advocate for the Air Force, that people are #1. Again, we have 3 goals. We have a lot on our plate. We have to keep a lot of balls in the air at all times, but let's not ever lose sight of the top priority, and the top priority is people. So we've talked a lot about the numbers of people. We've talked about how we need to upsize modestly our total force over the next several years. I called out several key areas like the world of nuclear and remotely piloted aircraft and cyber and maintenance across the board. This is not an exhaustive list, but it's a partial list, so that's part of it. But we also need to continue to make sure that we have pay raises. We need to continue to protect the most important family programs, because of course we always say we recruit airmen, but we retain families. We need to invest in training and professional development so that the Air Force is a rewarding place for people to grow and to learn and to contribute. So all of this is part of our people program. And then very importantly, I'm a believer in diversity of thought, diversity of background in our Air Force. So we're working on making our Air Force more diverse from all of those aspects, as well as race and gender and the whole panoply of what diversity means. And we have to continue to make sure that we fight sexual assault and these other behaviors which are not consistent with our core values of integrity and service before self and excellence in all that we do.
Okay, you mentioned diversity and how important that is, but I guess why is it so important? Just kind of explain a little bit why diversity is so important in just making sure that, you know, we can keep doing the mission and keep our Air Force able to continue on.
Well, I am absolutely convinced that as we go forward into the future, and in order to remain the best Air Force on the planet, once again, it comes down to people. And when we're talking about recruiting new airmen into our Air Force, of course, we want to be able to look out across the entirety of the U.S. population and be able to hopefully attract the best and the brightest. So right off the bat, 50% of the U.S. population is young women. So we have got to double down on that 50%, not lose sight of the 50% that's male, mind you, but we want to open the aperture and make sure that we're attracting the best and brightest from the entirety of the population. I think our future readiness really, really depends on it. The other thing I think our future readiness depends on is becoming more innovative across the board in our thinking. So innovations can be technology, but it can also be the way we approach problems and problem solve. And it has been my experience, and I think this is borne out by research that goes way beyond me, that when you have a diverse group of people who come from different backgrounds, different disciplines, they have different ways of approaching a problem, you will come up with different types of solutions to the same problems. If you have a group of people who all come from the same background, who are very, very similar in their approach and makeup, you will come up with the same type of solution over and over again. So diversity actually unleashes innovation, and that will be important for our future readiness as well.
All right, ma'am. I'm a little biased, but I agree with you that women are the best and the brightest, so we need more of them. You know, someone else who's the best and the brightest here where we work is Staff Sergeant Tracy Keller, and she's in the social media room right now with a question for us.
Oh, you're far too kind, Sergeant Roberts Davis. Thank you. Yes, that's right. I'm here in the social media room. We're still taking those questions via Facebook and Twitter by using the hashtag SECAF. Make sure you use that hashtag, and we'd be happy to get those questions. We have one question from Anita Solis on Facebook, and she asks, ma'am, is there an update on the maternity policy for the United States Air Force females?
I think everybody wants to know that.
All right, well, Anita, here is my update. The Force of the Future, which I mentioned earlier, which is a series of initiatives that the Secretary of Defense is rolling out over time. Indeed, the first initiatives have already rolled out. I'm projecting, based on what I know or have heard, that round 2 of announcements will be coming out in the next month or so. So that's a projection, next month or so. And if the maternity policy is not addressed as part of that, I believe it will be, but just in case it's not, I've said before and I'll repeat here today that I am prepared to use my authority as Secretary of the Air Force. I believe in what the Navy did. I think it was the right thing to do, and we're gonna do the same thing. It's a question of whether we do it under the Force of the Future or whether we do it separately. But for now, I want to wait and see what our Secretary of Defense does over the next month or so. So stay tuned, but I'm here to tell you it's coming.
All right, great question. You know, we've really gotten some great questions from all over. We got some questions from Hanscom, that's a little farther north than us. We got a question from Wright-Patterson, but now I'm going to make everybody who's stationed in this area a little bit jealous with our next Skype question. He's at Hurlburt Field in Florida right now, so I'm sure it's a little bit warmer out there, and I'm sure he won't brag at all about the weather. So if you could just introduce yourself, and we may have, it's Skype, so remember that if you have a hard time with it, we'll adjust from there.
Yes, good morning, Madam Secretary. It is a little warmer here in Florida than it is up there in Baltimore, I'm sure you. My name is Sergeant Tarbell. Currently work as a Special Operations Force Medical Element Independent Duty Medical Technician Paramedic. I know it's a pretty long title. But as a medical provider and an airman, I am concerned with the high suicide rates. What initiatives are you undertaking at the Air Force level to help combat this problem?
I'm really worried about this one too. This is one that we all need to be worried about, and it's a reminder, particularly as we're coming up on the holidays, which can be a tough time for people. Let's all really redouble our efforts to be good wingmen for one another and to watch our buddies and watch our colleagues in the unit. And if you see something, take some action. Go and give somebody a kind word, follow up. And if you feel like you can't address something yourself, seek out somebody who can provide some help, because there is a lot of helping resources available. Now, with all that said, we recently at the Air Force convened what we called a summit on this subject. That's how important it is to us. And we realized that this being another pretty bad year when it comes to our statistics on suicide, that whatever we have been doing is certainly not enough, and we need to refocus and kick it up a notch and look for new and different ways to approach this. So we had a summit. We brought in a variety of people from different specialties and career fields and ranks, and for several days talked about nothing but this. What are we doing, and what can we do differently to improve and get better and support our airmen differently? So there's a number of initiatives that came out of that summit. I'll tell you about one of them. One of them is we're going to try to do a better job of screening some of our younger airmen, particularly at the tech school level, and try to identify people who seem to be having difficulties, in problem solving perhaps, coping, and try to put a little bit more attention and help and assistance for some of those airmen. So that's one thing. On the medical front, we are looking to offer more full-up medical screening for those who actually come to us with certain problems and tell us they need help. We're going to give them a more complete medical screening and medical support services. So that's a second element. The third element that I'll report to you is that we will be building up with some additional manpower resources, what we call prevention specialists, and we're going to put them at different bases around the country. And the job of the prevention specialist will be to try to pull together the various helping resources and streamline some of the training programs that are out there, because what we've realized is we have sexual assault training, we have suicide prevention training, we have resiliency training, we have a variety of types of training, but there's overlap and there are themes which are very consistent. So one of the jobs of the prevention specialist will be to try to pull all of these assets and resources and training programs together, streamline, with the objective, of course, of having it be better training that more hits the mark, that more addresses the challenges that we all face. So those are some of the new things coming out of the summit. But first and foremost, we just have to remember to be good wingmen and to watch out for each other.
Yes, I completely agree with that. You know, when you talk about diversifying the Air Force, that means that there's a lot of people who come from different backgrounds and may handle the workload or may handle the holidays or may handle different aspects of their job differently than others. So it is very important to be good wingmen out there. I completely agree. And I know, you know, part of that goes into taking care of people. We've talked about that quite a bit during this show. So actually, let's take a moment and take a look at some more ways that people are out there getting the mission done. In case, again, anybody didn't realize, the F-22 Raptor is one of the most advanced and intimidating jets in the U.S. Air Force's arsenal. But at the end of the day, the plane itself is actually little more than a tool. From this next clip of Blue from Ground to Air, we learn that it's the airmen who fix it, fuel it, and fly it that make the Raptor a truly lethal weapon.
As a crew chief, you take pride in your jet, you know, because that's, at the end of the day, the crew chief owns that jet.
My jet is aircraft 107.
Aircraft 93.
Aircraft 81.
94.
72.
76.
91. My jet is aircraft 405.
My plane specifically, it's beautiful.
I call my jet the ugly duckling because it's not the prettiest plane, the LO's real damaged on it, but it never really breaks. So, you know, when another jet needs a part, they know they can can it from A9.
It's gonna show something about your personality and your character. If your jet's clean, looks good all the time. It'd be like on your car. If you notice your engine oil light's on, well, hey, maybe I need to add some engine oil, but you just keep driving, you know, you're neglecting your vehicle. You wouldn't do that to a sports car. Why would I do that to my jet out here?
Every time I'm put out on my jet, I wash it. I scrub down the whites. I wash any dirty part of the jet I can see.
No, actually, my first day on
on the flight line. Sergeant De La, he showed me the importance of wiping down your whites. Took that to heart a little bit.
It's yours, you maintain it, you fix it, it's yours, your name's on it. Okay, you won't find that in the civilian world. Think about you as 18-year-old. Where was you at, 18-year-olds? Did you have the stakes as high as these men and women have out here?
Every day once you put a pilot in the air, that pilot's life is in your hands. So that's very gratifying, knowing that you're keeping somebody safe, even though you may not always think of it that way. They may not always think of it that way, but it's always that is the case. You hold somebody's life in your work.
As you can see from the video, the airmen that maintain the F-22 love their aircraft like it's almost their own. And it's airmen like that that are finding new ways to save money, actually, by finding innovative ways to do what they love even better and faster than before. So when we look at these airmen, I know we've talked a lot about taking care of our people. You can tell it's your #1 priority because it's very important to you. Why are these airmen and the passion for their aircraft and what they do on a daily basis so important to the future of the Air Force?
Well, I just want to begin by saying I have seen this kind of passion, which for the F-22 and this team, hats off to you. Keep up the great work. I have seen similar stories, however, everywhere across our Air Force, which despite all the challenges and all the budget problems that we face and will continue to face, is the #1 reason why I'm so optimistic about the future of our Air Force. We're going to work through all these budget challenges. We've got top-notch people, and that's the key thing. And those F-22 team members, as well as team members for other weapon systems and all across the Air Force, they are able to pinpoint ways of doing business differently, which perhaps can free up some precious time or some precious money that we can then redirect and apply to other important needs for our Air Force. This is all what Airmen Powered by Innovation is all about, because the Secretary of the Air Force won't ever spot those things for the F-22, nor will the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. But our airmen will, and our airmen are spotting those things, and they're bringing them to our attention, and we are applying as many of these ideas and lessons learned as we can. Of course, we don't adopt all of the ideas, but we are adopting more and more. So I say, keep those ideas coming. We very much want them.
All right, great. We are going to get to those studio questions in just a second, I promise. So if anybody in the audience has a question, we will get to it, hopefully, if we have enough time. But first, we're going to go and actually, we have an airman who is going to speak to you a little bit, and he actually saved quite a bit of money. So we'll talk to him about that. Master Sergeant Miller, are you there and can you hear us?
Yes, I am.
All right. Can you tell us a little bit about what you did to save the Air Force some money?
Oh, certainly. First of all, I'd like to say good morning, Madam Secretary.
Good morning.
It's an honor and a privilege to be on this program.
Good morning.
And I am Master Sergeant Richard Miller. I am the machine shop supervisor at the 158th Fighter Wing, Vermont Air National Guard.
Okay. Do you have a question for the Secretary at all?
I do. Madam Secretary, I have noticed in the past 5 to 10 years an incredibly large push within the Air Force for continuing education. I saw this shift come about in the late 80s, gearing more towards the airmen, more towards the white-collar occupations within the Air Force and less so much in the trades. It's also a problem in the civilian sector. I understand the need for innovation and staying on top of what's out there. The one question I have, has any consideration been given to educating the trades and integrating Air Force personnel with an apprenticeship course in their various specialties, such as, in my case, machining or welding, construction work, any kind of the emergency services? It seems to me that it would be a cost-saving venture to integrate some of the civilian-related career fields within the Air Force into a one group, and also let the civilian sector teach the fine art of a very career field.
That's an interesting proposition, Richard. I'll have to admit, I personally had not thought of that before. However, if you've been listening throughout this program, you've heard me talk a couple of times about our Secretary of Defense's series of initiatives that he calls the Force of the Future. And I'm wondering, for future rollouts of Force of the Future, whether something like this, an idea like this, couldn't be further explored. So I'll tell you what, I'm going to promise to kind of take that back to the Pentagon and make a suggestion or two and see what we might be able to do. The Force of the Future, however, is definitely focusing on more on-ramps and off-ramps for our military personnel to give more flexibility over the course of however much time they may be with us, whether it's a full career or whether it is for 4 or 6 or 10 years. So more on-ramps and off-ramps, as well as more flexibility. This is a key thing. There are going to be more internships so that our military personnel can have more opportunities to have, let's say, a year with industry to explore different career fields and to broaden themselves, and likewise to bring industry people more into the Pentagon who have great knowledge and can help us perhaps problem solve in some key areas. So those sorts of internships will be increased. I take your point. I think it's a very worthwhile thing that we explore, seeing what more can we do to link ourselves with industry when it comes to the trades. So I'll take that back. Thank you.
Thank you,
All right.
Madam Secretary.
Thank you, Sergeant Miller. So, ma'am, it looks like we're actually winding down towards the end of the show. We do have about 3 or 4 minutes left, so if you would like to address anything that maybe we didn't get to, or if you have any closing remarks, if you could just let us know.
Okay. Well, I just want to take this opportunity to really thank our airmen across the Air Force and to thank our families of airmen across the Air Force. And remember, when I say airmen, I can't say it enough, active duty, National Guard, and Reserve, plus our families. It has been another busy, tumultuous year. But I remain so very proud of the contributions that we're making on the worldwide scene, as well as to protecting Americans here at home. Your efforts are recognized, they are appreciated, and please know that I and General Welsh and other senior leaders in Washington, we're going to continue to do our very best to tell the story here in Washington, to get the resources and policies that we need to take us into the future. I also want to wish everybody the best of a holiday season. Be safe, and I hope that you get some of that very precious downtime to spend with family and friends and to recuperate a bit from what has been an extremely busy year. But thank you.
All right, ma'am, thank you for that. And, you know, we didn't have enough time to get to everybody's questions. I know there were some people in the audience who wanted to ask some, and I'm sure that there were some social media questions out there that we didn't have a chance to get to. Don't worry, keep using that hashtag out there, and we'll make sure that you and your team will get to hopefully all of them. I know that that may not be possible, but she's going to try to get to as many as possible. Some of the video clips that we showed during the show, if any of you would like to find the full versions of those clips, you can always go to Air Force TV's Facebook page, Air Force TV, or our YouTube page, youtube.com/Air Force TV Radio. And we don't just have those video clips. We also have a bunch of stuff that we do, a lot of informational programs. So we'll have that. And then also, if you don't want to use the hashtag, which you should be using, you can always visit the SECAF's Facebook page, which is Secretary of the Air Force, Deborah Lee James. I know it's a mouthful, but you know, she's an important lady, so she has an important title. So head out to her Facebook and ask any questions on there. And I think her team is usually, you and your team are monitoring that pretty often. So, you know, you can keep asking questions and I'm sure that you'll get to them. Thank you again so much for being out here. We really appreciate it. I wish that there was more time in the show, but there just isn't. So we're going to go ahead and wrap things up a little bit. And that's it. So I guess that's the end of the show. So from Fort Meade, Maryland Fort Meade, Maryland, Air Force TV, I'm Tech Sergeant Holly Roberts Davis. Thanks for watching.